Welcome to Yelling into the Void, a podcast discussing and exploring topics in World of Warcraft. I'm Tevin. Scott joins me as always. And Scott, the spider's dead. She's dead.
Long live the queen.
Real talk though, why doesn't she turn into a crab with arachnophobia mode?
Well, I mean, if you looked at her,
She looks very spider-like.
I mean, she's got a big butt, and it's a big enough.
She does.
It's a big enough butt that it doesn't trigger people's spider fears.
I don't think I believe that.
When are we gonna add big butt-ophobia mode to World of Warcraft?
I wanna toggle that turns all of the crabs and spiders into squirrels.
That, I mean, I would like to see that too. I think every expansion they need to add a new toggle that turns things into other things.
Eventually, just like 3 expansions from now, you're just gonna have a game that's completely different from somebody else's fucking
I would
thing.
like a toggle that turns all players into mechanomes. Can we do that? Let's do that.
Dear God, no. Please don't do that. Well, Scott, I don't know if you know this or not, but there are some interesting things happening on WoW.
Are there?
The 0.5 patch is coming up.
Yeah,
So
they
that's kinda
announced
interesting.
the day today. We know when it's coming, right? It's 2 weeks from today.
Yes, 2 weeks from today, and that is the same time that the 20th anniversary stuff is happening as well, right?
I think that's the same patch, right? The 0.5 patch
Yeah.
is the 20th anniversary stuff. Yeah.
I thought they had given us the date for the raid at one point, but they didn't give us the date for like the rest of the patch. Am I wrong?
I
I
don't
might be wrong.
know. I'm pretty sure it all happens the same day. It would be
Yeah.
weird if they like time gated the just for fun nostalgia raid.
I don't know. I could be completely wrong. Either way, that's coming. I'm kind of looking forward to that. Also, I don't know if you read this or not yet, but so they've added new weapons into SOD. They're like epic weapons that people can get. So kind of like Rockdalar and Lockdalar were back in vanilla.
Okay.
They did it for every class. So they're adding models into SOD and they're adding these epic weapons into SOD. But with the 20th anniversary, they're bringing those models into retail.
Oh, I didn't
for
know that.
transport items.
That's fun.
Yeah.
What are they?
There's like a staff. There's like a purple staff. I don't remember all of them. There's quite a few, but I'm pretty sure every class has one. Again, this is just from me skimming Wowhead very quickly, so I'm not gonna die on this hill. I could be wrong.
I see some sort of dragon shield that looks kind of like Spyro the Dragon. Interesting.
So the only other thing that I really wanted to call out, and I think this is going to be like almost whiplash for people, but like the MDI is starting soon.
Yeah.
Very soon.
It's going to be interesting.
The MDI, and then right on the heels of the MDI is going to be TGP. So we're going to have like MDI and AWC are going to alternate weekends or whatever like they normally do.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have TGP right after all of that.
Yeah, so MDI time trials start basically a week from tomorrow on the 16th. And they're going to run a week, roughly. And then beginning of November is the actual MDI.
Which is just
crazy.
Wild.
That's crazy. So with keys the way they are right now, what is the key level that the MDI will be set at, do you think?
I can't imagine it's going to be much higher than a 12.
Yeah, I agree. Because like the highest keys being done right now are 14s, right? I think maybe. Yeah. Is there a 15 yet? I think it's 14s. And you don't usually do like world first key levels in the MDI. So like...
Yeah, it's only 14s currently.
They must... almost certainly it'll be just 12s, which... I mean, 12s have a whole bunch of problems that we'll get into. But it feels very weird. The whole thing feels very weird to me.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't know, maybe I'll save this thought for later in the show because we want to talk deeper about Mythic Plus.
Sure.
I think it's weird. I was talking with one of our guildies the other day, trying to like, have fun, guess like what is going to be the top end of keys this season. and I was saying like a conservative estimate for the top end of a key this season, if everything stays as it is now, is like an 18.
Yeah.
And I think that that even might be a little aggressive with how the scaling is working.
Yeah, I mean, there's still quite a few item levels to gain. However, with the way with the way 12s are destroying people right now, I think 18 feels about right. Of course, I will say I strongly suspect we are going to see a pretty massive like Mythic plus pool wide set of nerfs coming relatively soon. I mean, here's my bold and specific prediction. I would be shocked if by this time next week, when you and I are sitting down to record, they haven't at least announced some pretty huge tuning passes on the Mythic Plus dungeons. I really think that's
Sure.
about to happen.
Yeah, I kind of hope so. The other thing that I wanted to kind of raise is with the point 0.5 patch coming, that is bringing quite a few class shakeups, like to the point of potentially having a completely new tank be meta.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually
That could
looked
help
at
too.
the crunch numbers yet, but like Prop Paladin just got buffed pretty nicely today. And then there's additional buffs coming in a couple weeks. So it's very I mean like the old standard with Prop Paladin is it's so good. It has so much utility that if it's remotely close to the other tanks in strength, it's probably going to be arguably meta, and it seems like that's where we're going to be. So yeah, I think the only thing I can see is that would probably have to correspond with a nerf to just the dungeon pool in general, because I just think the reason why warriors kind of fallen out as the meta tank right now is just because they're so tanky against white hits, and the biggest problem in high keys right now is that white hits are just ripping tanks apart. So
Mhm.
um I mean, it's not to say that paladin isn't good at that, it's just not as good as warrior is at it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the coming weeks. I mean, all of this theoretically needs to happen before the MDI, right? So,
I
yeah.
mean, that's the weird thing, because since time trials are starting before this is so time trials are starting before the point 0.5 patch, but the MDI will be taking place after the point 0.5 patch. I believe the tournament realm's actually already open for participants, so you could technically be running practice keys on the tournament realm at max gear right now if you wanted to. If not, they'll be open soon. How do you don't want to practice too much if your comp's going to change? Like and what patch level is the tournament realm at? Is it going to be at point 0.5? I mean, it should,
Yeah.
right? This is weird.
So for viewing experience, I feel like it needs to be the point 0.5
It
patch,
would be
right?
very
Because it'd be
different.
really weird.
Yeah, yeah. If the average player
Um,
is watching this thing and they're playing on a different version of the game, that would be very strange. Yeah.
yeah, I mean they do it for like League of Legends for like worlds and stuff. They'll have a patch that they designate as like this is the world's patch. Everyone will be at this. We'll still continue to iterate afterwards. But also, I feel like for WoW, in the way that they do like such heavy-handed class changes, like for example with this point 0.5 patch, like you're gonna have paladins have a literally entire different talent tree
Yeah.
between before and after the point 0.5 patch, and I can't see a world in where they are okay with that being different from live,
That would be
but
very
maybe.
strange. It'd be very strange, yeah. I think what they're going to do is probably just update the tournament realm when the patch goes live, and don't the teams don't practice too much. Don't practice too much. But I like, again, I also have not been paying attention to the theory crafters about like what they're expecting for prop paladin, like how good it's actually going to be. I'm just not sure.
Well, I mean, if you're going straight for a damage tank too, like it's not going to be the top damage most likely. Like
Mm,
Brewmaster solidly has top
which
damage
is
locked in right
wild,
now.
yeah. But yes, you're right.
Uh, anyways, to kind of jump into some of our main segments tonight, because I don't know how long we're going to spend on these. Um, but our first thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is our guild did end up getting AOTC this week,
We did
last
it
night actually.
before they nerfed it. They haven't nerfed it
Bef-
yet, but I'm just assuming they're about to. So before they nerfed it, we did it.
Before they nerfed it, and before the severed threads buff.
Yes, which makes you feel good, doesn't it? We didn't need any extra help.
Um, that being said, I do have some thoughts about this raid. So now we've seen the mythic versions, we've seen Race to World First, we've experienced normal and heroic on our own, and I mean, I think my sentiment is the same as it was coming into this a couple weeks ago. That this raid is overall pretty good. I guess I think there are a couple of stumbling points, and we can talk about those. I
Okay.
think that the penultimate boss is definitely one where like the fight itself is super cool, but like the difficulty, like it goes up, 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 and then it just kind of like
Well,
drops, and then it goes back up again.
yeah, I mean, honestly, the thing that happened with the final boss is that they nerfed it in between our like 20 minutes of prog at the very end of a raid night and our re-clear the next week where we just like walked in there on the nerf version, pulled it twice and killed it. Um,
Mhm.
so that's part of it for sure. Like the change of you only need one set of tethers to stop the boss instead of two in heroic was actually a pretty fundamental change in how that boss works in heroic. Um,
Yeah,
and I was a little disappointed about that. Like I would have liked to see it kept. I understand why they did it because it's just it what like that is a difficult mechanic for groups to handle, especially non-coordinated groups. Like if you're trying to pug mythic, that's got to be a pain in the ass to do. So like I get it, but it was a little disappointing. I will say on our kill this week, we had basically pretended like we were doing mythic, and so we had assigned 3 groups to handle that. And on our kill this week, every time I saw 3 sets of tethers out there. So it's not like we're ready for Mythic because Mythic has this whole other mechanic that is you can't stand near each other and you have to collect orbs and shit. But at least we like got that part of it down. So that felt a little good.
yeah, yeah. And so I guess let's start from the beginning of the raid. So again, I think the raid was pretty good, aesthetics wise and everything like that. I'm not the biggest fan of the Nerubian aesthetic, but I
Fine.
think that they nailed it with this raid. I definitely think it's actually Wrath time walking right now, and we went back and we did some of the old Nerubian dungeons, and like I think that this is quite literally just like higher res Nerubian architecture, which like it sounds so stupid to say because you're like, oh yeah, that's of course that's what it's gonna be, you dummy. But I mean, it is what it is. I think they nailed it. So the aesthetic of the raid's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan. I think it works very well as like a first raid of an expansion thing. It sets the tone and the architecture's cool and the bosses are fun. Like I'm not gonna like look back on this raid and be like, this is the best raid that World of Warcraft has ever done in the history of the game. No, but yeah, it's good. It's good. It was fun. I liked it.
The other thing that I wanted to say is, I guess as we start, um, you kind of like you go into the first boss, and like you're on this platform, like a normal like Nerubian like style platform, and then the platform breaks, and then you're down in this like almost like slums looking area, kind of like you're in like near where City of Echoes is,
Mm-hmm.
something like that, and I feel like the climb back up the tower through like the bugs and everything is also done extremely well. Like the platforms are just kind of like hanging there, like it would be something that spiders would do. I don't know. It just felt really cool.
Yeah, it's weird because this was the thing in the expansion announcement that they like. I think it was a BlizzCon. There was like the raid preview panel or whatever, and they like really hyped up the fact that in this raid you're gonna start here and then you're gonna fall down to this pit, then you're gonna have to climb back up. They like made a really big deal out of it. Like they were very proud of this incredible idea they had of you go in and then you go down and then you come back up. It was yeah. I mean, I wasn't in love with it. Actually, like the first time I did it, I really wasn't paying attention and I didn't realize that's exactly what we were doing, that we were like slowly climbing back up. Um, but when I realized that was actually what we were doing, I was like, oh yeah, that's neat. That's why we're jumping across from platform to platform. I guess
Mhm.
I don't know. It's tough for me to be too critical on this because like when you're in a raid, like for the first time, you're just kind of nervous and you're like paying attention to, you're trying to juggle mechanics in your head as you get nearer to the boss. And also you're just joking around with friends. Like I felt like the story of this raid, like the like as you're going through the thing, storytelling was very lost to me a lot of the times. Like, question, Kavessa, what's she, what's she doing there? Why is she there?
Yep. I don't know. I have no idea.
I mean, presumably at some point in the game, they told us why there was an ethereal there that was fighting with them. And I'm guessing we're gonna see her later, right? Like, I think she disappears at the end of this fight instead of dies, and so we're gonna probably encounter her in a later raid or zone or something. But like, I don't know what she's doing there.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to say is super interesting is when you actually get back up and like this, I think is one of the first raids in a long time, really, that has been like almost 100% linear.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I mean, Amir Drasil had the two wings. Like, I feel like this is the first time where in uh, like years, maybe, that we haven't had like wings of a raid. We haven't
yeah,
had to pick like a left or a right path, kill a couple bosses, come back to the middle. It's like it splits into like two paths, and then you come right back.
yeah.
So that was also interesting to
Do
me.
you do you care about
Yeah.
that? So like, I was thinking about this because like in my dungeons, I think having multiple options and non-linearity is good, right? Because then you have like ability to kind of approach the dungeon differently, especially if it's Mythic Plus, ability to like kind of define your route and approach it differently, and that route could change as difficulty levels go up. In a raid, I don't really care. Like, we're gonna be fighting the bosses in a certain order no matter what. Like, I guess it's sometimes cool to be like, we're gonna just do this wing. I can't even come up with a reason why it's cool. Like, I don't care outside of aesthetics. Like in in raids like Ice Crown Citadel, it was cool because like they were themed, right? And so not only were you doing these different wings, but like they were the themed wings for the three parts of Death Knights. There was the disease wing, there was the blood wing, and there was the frost wing, and like that was, I thought that was aesthetically cool. But outside of that, I don't really care how they decide to lay out the boss order.
Yeah, I don't care. I will say the one thing that is interesting to me is this where this raid specifically split is also where this raid became difficult.
True.
And I think that is an interesting choice because now instead of just having like a standard, okay, we're going to do this route every week kind of thing, you actually are met with like a choice of like these are two fairly equally difficult bosses.
Hmm.
It doesn't really matter what one you do before the other one because there's no boss coming after it. Like you don't have to think about like, okay, well this boss is easy, but the one following it's going to be harder than anything in the other wing. So I thought that was interesting, but no, ultimately I don't really care. I mean, your raid is going to pick one side or the other, and they're going to do it the same way every week, and so ultimately it's going to essentially be a linear raid for you, anyways. So
I also think it's kind of funny how in like the easier difficulties, like normal and heroic, I think Kavessa was significantly easier than Brood Twister was, but like in Mythic, it's the exact opposite, right? It's, you definitely go Brood Twister first into Kavessa.
yeah, yeah, which is funny, seeing as when we watched the race, they did Kavesa first into Brood Twister, didn't they? I'm pretty sure they killed Kavesa first.
I don't remember.
At least Liquid did.
No, it was Brood Twister first, wasn't it?
I don't remember. I could look it up, but I don't think it's that big of a deal.
I
I'm
was pretty
pretty.
confident about what I said, and now you've just thrown me completely.
I think so. I think you are correct in that the majority of guilds are going to Brood Twister now, but I'm pretty sure during the race they did Kavesa
They did Brood
first.
Twister first. You were wrong. You were wrong.
Oh, sad. Wait, really?
Yeah.
Because I swear to God, there was one guild that went Brood Twister first. and that was weird.
No,
Okay.
no.
Well, don't listen to me. Clearly, everything that I've said today has been inaccurate, and I should feel bad.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I agree.
um, anyways, all of that aside, uh, I guess do we want to? I feel like going boss by boss is a bit overkill for week
No, I
3
mean,
of a
we've kind of
raid.
already talked about the raid. I think this is just like this is our kind of final look at it as we've completed it, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I don't think we need to go step by step.
So we've already said this, but now that we've killed it and we've experienced some of the nerfed bosses, what is now your favorite boss?
Good question. I think Ansarek, honestly. I think Ansarek is my
Hmm.
favorite boss in this raid, which is I think the way it should be. The best boss, the most fun boss should be the final boss. Um and I thought this was a really fun fight. It was a challenging fight. It was kind of a weird fight as a tank. Me and my co-tank had a lot of threat issues on this fight and only this fight for some reason. It was so weird to me where I've told myself now, like, if I see like a bug be patched out in a week or two that's like fix some weird threat shenanigans on Ansarek, I would be like, yep, I knew it. Something weird was going on there. Just had like weird things where like so my Kotek is a brewmaster, so they were obviously out DPSing me like crazy, and we had some weird things where they were out DPSing me, but I would pull threat in various moments. Like we essentially ended up solving this by just we were if we were tanking the boss, we were hitting taunt on cooldown. Like every 8 seconds, I was hitting taunt, just doing it. And that was not something we had to do on any of the other bosses in this raid. It was weird. I don't know. Maybe it was because of the movement. Because the thing I thought was maybe every time you had to do a tank switch, you also, just the way we were doing it, had to immediately move the boss. So you would taunt and then not have any uptime on the boss as you were trying to move it, or have less uptime, rather. So if someone got like a high crit attack right after the taunt 2.5 seconds was up, but before you've really done any more threat. It was, I don't know. I don't have to go into detail. Point is, it was a challenging fight as a tank for several reasons, especially phase one, and I really enjoyed it.
I actually really liked Ansarek as well. As a range DPS, it is frustrating. It's frustrating to have to move so much in phase one. It's frustrating that there is so much movement. But that being said, there is so much like skill expression in your ability to like position correctly and use your movement abilities to the best of your advantage that like it actually makes it fun rather than just like I'm pissed off I have to move all the time.
Yeah,
um I think the best example of this is like I'm playing Warlock right now, and Demonic Circle is unironically, I think, one of the best abilities on this fight. Like, I I can place in phase one. Um, I was placing it during the like pull-in intermission with the shield, and I was just porting back. Every other pull-in, I could just port back to where I was and not have to worry about the pull-in at all. And then in phase two, again, every other pull-in, I could just demonic circle back to where I was and
hmm
not worry ever about getting pulled off. And then in phase three, I can just use it to skip the ring entirely. So like there is so much fun stuff that you could do with like movement abilities on this fight that it actually made it a lot more fun. And honestly, outside of phase one, this fight like pops off for DPS.
yeah,
I don't know how other DPS feel, but like phase one is by far the hardest part of the fight,
for
in
sure.
my opinion, but also the most boring for DPS. When you get into phase two and there's like kill this ad before it blows you up, there's a shit ton of other things that you have to kill. This thing's shooting a beam all over the place and you need to kill it. And then you get into phase three and it's like blast the boss for like 20 seconds or 25 seconds while she's casting at the beginning, and then immediately going into blast these ads before they reach the boss, into immediately kill these hanging ads so that we can get the thing to drop. Like, I don't know. There was just so many fun parts of this fight after you got past phase one for DPS that I agree with you. Ansreg is by far my favorite fight of the
I
raid.
agree that it's. I mean, as a tank, it was really fun. I got to do some fun movement stuff like in phase two where I was like saying "fuck this pull in, I need to tank this mob," and then I got to feral charge back to it while I was flying through the air. It was always fun. Um, I was surprised. So yeah, phase one from a tank perspective, definitely the hardest. Like both of the tank busters that you swap between, either one, you're going to take a shitload of damage and then get a huge dot on you for 30 seconds, or two, you're going to take a shitload of damage and then get a huge heal absorb on you. Both of them are difficult to deal with and require you to really, really play smart and with your cooldowns. That was a lot of fun. The thing I did not expect at all was phase two fucking you up. Like like those mobs, I guess just because they're not bosses, they're just mobs. You just don't go into them expecting them to hit as hard as they did. But holy shit, you land on that platform in phase two, and they just start trucking you. And then you have the little spider ads that do the damage increase thing on you. So if you're not being smart with stuns on those, that really adds up. Like I was just very surprised at how much I got hurt in phase two. And then I guess my only disappointment with the fight would be phase three. Like it's not that the phase isn't fun. I think it's like a crazy like machine gun of mechanics, is I think what our raid leader called it. And it's really fun, but from a tank perspective, like there's not too much going on. Like actually
Mhm.
I was really surprised because like the way you handle the tank swap in phase three is one person will get the giant circle on them that spawns the ads. They run away, they spawn the ads, then they immediately run back and taunt the boss back, because while they were dropping the ads, the other tank is getting hit by a huge flurry of tank buster attacks that increase your physical damage taken, but with each hit. So basically, you can't tank that and then just tank the boss normally. So I would tank it for like 8 seconds, and then my co-tank would take it back, and then it was just like waiting again for the next tank buster. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, it made it easy for me to like help out with the acolytes and get kicks on that and things like that, but it was a little disappointing just how little I was tanking in that final phase.
Yeah, I was talking with our raid leader a little bit too. I don't remember if this was today when we were talking, or yesterday when we were talking with you, or if it was today. Um, but I think he put it best when he said phase three was fun, but it was disappointing because this boss was so front loaded with
Yeah.
mechanics
Yeah.
that like phase three, there wasn't really prog to phase three. Like you make it to phase three, everybody's alive, you have a B-res, boss is gonna die.
Yeah. I mean, and that's not an uncommon thing with some of these final boss fights. Like I'm thinking of Razagath, which is a fight that I really, really loved. And that was not front loaded because phase one was not the hardest. Well, in Mythic it was, but in Heroic, phase one was not the hardest phase of that. Phase two was harder. But then the third phase was kind of like if you got there, you were gonna make the check. I think part of this is because in easier difficulties like Heroic, like the DPS check is technically there, but part of the decreased challenge of the fight is that they're really never gonna push you on DPS burn check. So if there's a burn phase in a raid, like as long as you have people alive, you're always going to make the check. And so it's always going to make these final phases feel a little bit more disappointing when they're burn phases. I will say, like, yes, it was disappointing that there was no prog there essentially. I think it was like the third time we got to phase three, we just killed it. Um, but like it is a fun phase. Like it like the
Yeah.
amount of shit that's going on and the way the shit starts increasingly overlapping as it was going. Like you're like, okay, we got this down. Okay, well now you have to deal with this also and that. It was a lot of fun. And part of me wonders, like, we've definitely grown in item level, and so we had higher raid DPS than we had in the previous weeks. Like if we had gotten to this week one and had to do phase three in week one, it's not that we wouldn't have been able to get the DPS check down, but some of the overlaps that we were just starting to get as the boss died, I think would have been interesting.
Yeah, I also think that to be, I guess, not really devil's advocate, but to have a different viewpoint on this, um, Sylvanas was a boss that had a lot of prog late into the fight, and you had to do like 5 minutes worth of a fight before you actually got back to that prog point,
Yeah.
and that was extremely frustrating. So I think that it's
Yeah.
honestly better to have the like hard stuff front loaded. Um, But yeah, I don't really know the sweet spot here. Like clearly we feel some type of way about this because we're talking about it. So maybe they needed to put a little bit more into later halves of the fight, but then I don't remember Sylvanas fondly, so don't put all of it at the end of the fight. So
Yeah.
there's got to be a sweet spot somewhere.
No, I think you're right. I mean, because I think on the one hand, absolutely, it is annoying to have to do 5 minutes of a fight to know that you're just the point of this pull is to spend 5 minutes doing the stuff that you know how to do to see if maybe you're gonna advance in the fight later. Yeah. On the other hand, it feels really bad when you've been pulling the same boss for hours and you still know you're on phase 1 of 3. Even if you like know that the other two phases are easier, there's still like a psychological thing when you're just like, we're not even out of the first phase yet and we're having like that kind of messes with you. So I agree with you, there's probably a sweet spot. I think ultimately, like, I really liked this. I thought it nailed it pretty closely. And it's kind of going to be weird because this boss is definitely going to get nerfed soon. But on top of the boss getting nerfed, like this buff we're going to start getting next week, it's going to be weird to see how fucking fast phase 3 is in like a month. If we're still re-clearing heroic in a month from now, like, how fast is phase 3 gonna die? Because I feel like, so we killed it when the second set of acolytes was spawning. Like, the second set of acolytes had spawned, and the boss was at like 4%, and we were just like, let's just kill boss, ignore acolytes, kill boss. Like, I'm wondering in a month with everyone's gear level higher and this buff, if we're like first set of acolytes are spawning, boss dead. That would be wild.
Mhm.
But that's kind of what happened to Frack, right? Like, with not only did they nerf it, but you used like one seed and then the boss died.
Yeah. Is that buff going to be weekly, bi-weekly?
I don't know. Um
Okay.
I don't even know what it caps out at. Did they say 15% or is it 30%? I don't even remember.
I don't remember. I believe they did say in a dev interview at
Yeah.
one point, but I don't remember. Um, yeah, I look. So on bosses like this, they're only going to get easier the more damage you have. Like, I'm pretty sure you force a phase, if you get her down to like 30%, she immediately goes into phase 2,
Yeah.
or at least the intermission for phase 1 with the shield. Um, so presumably, at some point, the play might be to lust on pull, push her as quickly as possible so you don't have to do as many pops. And then you blast phase 2, and then you just get up and you kill the boss before she even drops down because you have so much gear and so much increased damage in phase 3. Ultimately, I
Yeah.
don't know. It's going to be interesting, though.
It's gonna be fun. That's, I mean, like, I'm not a huge fan of farm, but like that's part of re-clearing that I think is fun when you just see like, last week it took us this long to kill this boss. This week we fucking destroyed it. Like, that's like
Mhm.
our re-clear this week before we got to Ansarek was just like, I mean, it's wild how different it feels. Like, I remember the first week talking to my co-tank and we're like, hey, these bosses are hitting pretty fucking hard. And then like this week on Reclear, I think we both got like 90 something parses for every boss. I was a little late to the raid, so I didn't do every boss, but every boss I was part of, he and I were parsing really high. And he's like, Did you hit any buttons, any cooldowns, any defensives during that at all? It's like, no, I didn't hit Iron Fur once. I was it was all going into damage because they're just not doing any damage.
Yeah. Well, so I guess, do you have a least favorite boss?
Um, that is a good question. I think honestly, like, the first thing that jumped in my head is the first boss. Surprisingly,
Hmm.
it's not that it's almost because it's not hard, and it just feels like it takes forever because of the way the intermission phase works on it. Um, it's one of those things. I think we talked about this before, but when I read about it, I thought it sounded really cool, and then the actual execution of it was not very cool. Because yeah, like, I liked the second boss quite a bit. I thought that was really fun. Um, what are the names of the bosses?
Bloodbound Horror's the
Yeah,
second boss. Olgrax is the first
Sikran. A
boss.
lot of people don't like Sikran. I like, as a tank, Sikran doesn't feel like I have enough to do to like or dislike it. Like, it is a weird fight where I just kind of have nothing to do at all. It's essentially for me like a patchwork fight. Like, we just swap and then stand there, and that's it.
Mhm.
Um, Rashanon is still pretty annoying. So I think it's close between Rashinon and between Olgrax for me on my least favorite.
I personally think that Rashinon's my least favorite. It feels like a weird gimmicky fight and not necessarily a difficult gimmick, but
Well,
just
not a
like a gimmick set there to like prolong the fight.
yeah, but not a fun gimmick, right? Like gimmicky
Yeah.
fights are cool if the gimmick itself is interesting, and the gimmick might like outstay its welcome. But if it's a fun gimmick, you could at least say, "Hey, this was fun the first time." Like, what is even the gimmick here? Is that he just flies around? Like that's the
Yeah.
gimmick.
I so I struggle with this boss because on one hand, like it is super cool and like the lines that you have to like split is super cool, and in Mythic it being like a triangle, I think is an amazing way to like up the difficulty of that mechanic. But also the patterns of what this boss does, while it's the same every time you pull it, is different every time he lands. And it's like it's different to the point where it's annoying. As like a DPS player, obviously killing the ads is nothing but fluff on this boss. But you need somebody to do it, which means somebody needs to be holding their cooldowns for it.
Yeah.
And it being at a different part of the fight every time it lands, or sometimes even two times when he lands, like is really frustrating.
Yeah, it also like has this weird thing with its tank buster where it's not consistent. Like sometimes it'll do the tank swap mechanic once, and so you just taunt like normal, and then sometimes it'll do it back to back. So you do take one, and then it does it again, and it's not consistent like when that happens and when it doesn't. It's really strange. It's a really strange fight. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you've convinced me.
That
This is my least favorite.
that coupled with the bug that was in the game for a while where if you like killed him while he was flying, he just never
Stupid.
died and you had to reset the boss is yeah.
Can I be
Icing on the cake.
the number of times, by the way, during the I think the 3 pulls that we needed to prog this boss, but and on reclears, the number of times the boss does this thing when it summons the ads where it like flies up into the air briefly, and the number of times I've thought we've triggered the flight phase and like started to run is too high. Because it flies up into the air like, oh, we're on the flight phase now. It's like, oh nope, spawned ads. Like I ripped stampeding roar like early way too many times on this fight because of that.
Yeah. The first boss though, I will say, and this is a like PSA to everybody who has done this boss and is really annoyed with it. Tell your guild to stop going and killing the ads. Like, you know where the ads spawn, on what side of the platform the ads spawn. The boss will always spawn on the opposite side. So go stand where the boss is going to spawn. Those ads will come to you
Yeah,
and just kill them over there.
yeah.
And then you don't have to run anywhere. You just throw them all the food and you're good to go.
Smart.
So PSA.
Yeah.
uh, I don't know. So the second boss is one that I feel like is super cool. I want this to be one of my favorite fights. The problem with this boss is the beam mechanic and like the onus on that is awesome. The ads, however, that you have to kill during the like down phase, in my opinion, are just kind of bland and uninteresting. And
Yeah.
I think that that kind of kills this boss for me.
That's fair. I mean, so yeah, there's 3 ads, right? There's 2 that just stand there and summon baby ads. And then there's
Mhm.
a big one that's the ad you have to tank. And literally all it does is it will start a cast that I think heals the boss or puts a shield on the boss. One of those 2 things. And then you kick that cast and it's just done doing anything until it dies. And it
Yep.
doesn't hit particularly hard. It's just you taunt it and then you kill it. And you usually kill it last because it's the one that moves. But it's nothing.
Hmm.
Yeah, and also like the spawn placement of the ads is really kind of weird too. Like sometimes the 2 mob summoning ads are like near each other, and then sometimes they're crazy far apart from each other. Which I
Yeah.
get. I like. I guess in my mind, that should be if you're going to make them spawn really far apart from each other because that increases the challenge of the mechanic. It should be consistent in doing that you always have to deal with this. You're like, because right now basically all you do is you see where the ads spawn, you line up the beam to where you give yourself a basically 180-degree rotation of the beam to kill all the ads, and that's plenty of time. Now, if they
Mhm.
spawn like really, really spread out, that changes the dynamic, and you actually have to position it to where you have the most time on the first one, but then you're like running as the beam's coming and trying to kill the other, and that's more exciting. So like, if they were going to do that, that it should have been that consistently, and I think that would have
Yeah.
improved the challenge. But I say that, but like already pugs like fucking just can't handle this boss at all. So
So one thing I do want to talk about, because I think this is going to segue into our Mythic Plus discussion pretty well, is I want to talk about like the difficulty step up,
mhm.
for heroic specifically for the bosses in this raid. So you go in and Algarax, and again, this is going to be from the perspective of somebody in a coordinated group, not necessarily super coordinated like Mythic Raider type guild, but like your general AOTC mindset.
Mhm.
You go in. Olgrax is pretty straightforward. You get through that. You go to Bloodbound Horror. Maybe that one takes you guys a couple of wipes, but you get through that ultimately because, like we just said, the beam mechanic's really the only thing that you got to master in there. Everything else just kind of falls into place and is kind of bland. It's just hit the ads, hit the boss, and then move.
Yeah, and I
Um,
mean mastering the beam mechanic is literally just the tanks have to see it, and like you see it once, maybe twice, and you're like, "Oh, I get it."
mhm. And then we go into Sikran, which like this boss to me this is one of the stumbling points for the raid for me, because I feel like this is first boss is a general step below the second boss, and then you get to Sikran, and I think you go back down to like the level of the first boss. I don't think that Sikran's particularly difficult, and it's to the point where like this boss I genuinely forget is in the raid. Like I regularly forget Sikran as a boss and just think we're going to ration on after Bloodbound Horror.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I I agree. I think it's this weird combination of just the second boss being probably more challenging than they thought it was going to be, and this boss just not doing very much. Like it's one of those. Actually, it's funny because when I looked at this boss on paper and I looked at what the mechanic was, I was like, oh man, we're gonna have a hard time with this. Actually,
Mhm,
like we're gonna struggle on making sure that the lines are going between the four players in a controlled way that's not hitting extra people and not getting people hit with multiple lines. But then in execution, it's actually just really simple. And everyone
mhm.
in our raid picked it up like almost immediately. And we were rarely, if ever, having like extra clones made or whatever. Um and then it's like I can't even remember outside of that what the boss does. Does this boss have an intermission phase?
There's like a point blank AoE that he
Oh
does.
yeah.
So it does raid wide damage and then it does AoE around him. And if there's any simulacrums up, it pops those and deals additional
Yeah, but
damage.
there's never going
But
to be
that's
because
like
it's
it.
the easiest thing to manage in the world. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Pretty disappointing boss overall. Not like enough to dislike it. It's just like, yeah, it fades from memory. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And then you get to Rashanon. And I think Rashanon's right there on the level of Brood Twister of
Yeah.
like difficulty wise. I don't think it's hard, or not Brood Twister. Sorry,
I was
Bloodbound
gonna say,
Horror.
I was like, what?
Uh, Bloodbound Horror, where it's like it's not particularly difficult. There's a couple of things that you need to get down. Once you get those down, then it's easy.
I think it's easier than
Um,
Bloodbound Horror. Because like,
that's honestly fair.
yeah,
Like the only thing that's going to kill you in this fight really is people not running shit out. Which I mean, if you've been playing WoW for any certain amount of time, you know to do that.
yeah.
And then the pull in. So like, yeah, sure. Let's say guilds wipe 2 or 3 times to getting pulled off the edge because not everybody stacks. But like,
But
really, that's about it. That's the only thing that's going to kill you.
yeah, but like in a game where some of the telegraphs in this game are so hard to decipher and difficult to see, like the stack mechanic marker in this game is the one thing that I think they've done a pretty good job of making extremely clear. Like when you see this, this means everyone stacks on it. So like that's a really easy thing to overcome. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't even think that is particularly hard.
Yeah. So then we get into the big, like, what I would call the wall. So you get to Kaveza and you get to Brood Twister at this point. And we've already touched on this, but I think for heroic, Kaveza is easier than Brood Twister.
Yes.
I think that's
Um
right. I
just
have this ordered right.
just I mean like on the personal accountability scale for I think so.
Kaveza still does blast you with damage in heroic.
Oh yeah,
Like, it's not a joke amount of damage. It's still a relatively difficult fight.
it's my
Um,
second favorite fight in the raid, like for sure.
I do think that a lot of people who play range in this game are going to absolutely have bad memories of this fight, which is hilarious because I think this fight is infinitely harder for melee.
Yeah.
Uh, Ranged on this fight, if you are struggling, if you're listening to this, you're struggling with this boss at all, the easiest way that I can explain this to you is the room is divided with like lines going through it, and those are perfect for the pie slices.
Mm-hmm.
So just park yourself on the line on the safe side, like a baby step over the line. Let the one go off and then jump back over to the other side and wait. Um, so yeah, I think that this boss isn't necessarily hard. It's just a really big step up in the HPS required, and that is kind of where the difficulty of this boss comes from. Also, the gimmick of the fight with the suck-ins isn't necessarily intuitive. Um, it doesn't have like a very good indicator on where you will kind of like get stuck. So that's another thing to think about. And then the last, like, I think hard part of this fight is the orbs that you drop whenever you get a mechanic. And that takes some getting used to. I think the hardest part about that isn't necessarily how to drop them, but how to drop them and then get pulled in a way in which you aren't going to die. I think that's where the difficulty for that comes from.
Yeah, yeah. I think overall, still not that bad, but fun.
Yeah.
But fun.
Uh, so I guess from a tank perspective, I want to kind of get your thoughts on this. The tank drop doesn't really have much of an indicator that it's coming out at all, and it happens like immediately. So if you're not already pre-positioned or pre-moving, it's going to drop in a shit spot.
Yeah,
Was that frustrating or annoying or something?
only for the first couple of pulls because I agree with you. It's really kind of weird, like getting the timing right of exactly when that was happening. But then we kind of quickly realized that essentially what happened, that the cadence of the fight for the tank is the boss will do its tank buster, which is like 2 hits to one hit to the other. So you taunt after the second hit, and then the portal that it will drop will happen a few seconds after that. So essentially, all you do is the tank that taunts it to take it off just runs to a portal spot as soon as they do
Mhm.
that, and that's it. And once you get that down, it's simple. But yeah, at first it was like the timing of it, like there was definitely, if you go back and look at some of our first pulls where we were just dropping that shit like right in the middle of the room when we didn't mean to, because it's just we hadn't had the timing of exactly when that thing's going to drop. But yeah, it's, if you're taunting the boss to take it, your a portal is going to drop soon, and that once you get that in your head, it's super easy.
Well, I guess to jump over to the next one, I already said we weren't gonna, or you said we weren't gonna go
Yeah,
boss by
that's what
boss,
I was
but
about
we
to say.
almost.
Is we said we weren't going to go boss by boss, and then you tricked me, and now suddenly we're
Uh,
doing this.
I don't necessarily want to talk about the mechanics on this boss because there's a lot to talk about here, but I think that the biggest jump in difficulty is the personal responsibility on this one, and it really gets you ready. More so, I think, for Ansarek, because you have to be paying attention, and if you're a bubble popper on Ansarek, you have to be paying attention.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
Anything else you want to throw on that one?
I would say that. See, I don't even know if they need to nerf this one anymore. But like, if you're gonna, the way to do it is to give yourself a little bit more leniency on egg breaking. Like, essentially, the way this fight operates on heroic and beyond is if you miss one, you're probably gonna wipe. And like, we have now progressed to the stage where like, if we do miss one, we can probably recover from that. I think actually on our reclear pull on Friday, that's exactly what happened. Is someone missed their egg break, and we were able to just let the creeping toxin whatever break it, and we were able to get the ads down before it messed anything up. But like in Prague, for sure, if you fuck up one egg break, you're cooked. And
Yeah.
see, I don't know, like I want to say like maybe give a little bit more leniency to that, but maybe not. Maybe that's the point. Like that's the progression point. That's the challenge of the fight. You have to learn to get that down, and so you're not going to kill the boss until you learn to get that down. So I don't want to stand here and be like, oh, you should make this easier by doing X. when X is like the whole. That's the fight. So I don't know.
I definitely think that it is something that they could do for heroic. I think doing that for mythic kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah, definitely not.
Um, talking with the talking with our raid leader today, he made a good point on like you can't mess up an egg break on mythic because you're already dying to other mechanics. So if you are missing egg breaks and you're dying to that on top of everything, you're literally just doubling your pulls for no reason other
Yeah.
than people just aren't taking personal responsibility well.
I think one thing they
So,
could do is make the range that the egg breaks a little bit bigger. Um, just like the circle around you to break the egg. It's pretty small. And especially on
mhm.
Mythic where you need two people to break the eggs, but you're trying to stack up and do that, but not get hit by mechanics and swirlies and stuff. Like there's definitely times where people just like think they're on top of the egg, but they're not. And so
Yeah.
maybe make it a little bigger, I think.
Um, So then next would be court. And this one we've already talked about. I don't think that there's much really else to go in here. Um, I think the nerf to this boss is another kind of one of the stumbling points in difficulty progression throughout this raid because it takes what a boss that was what I would say is probably on par with Kaiveza and Brood Twister and makes it easier than them.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about bosses need to get progressively harder, that's a bit of a stumbling point.
This was the most
But yeah.
disappointing one to me by far because I was really looking forward to it. I think the mechanics are cool. I think the having to stop the guy's charge with the webs is really cool. I think dispelling on the one boss to interrupt their cast is really cool. I think the intermission phases and like the one is the intermission phase from the one boss, and then the other is the intermission. Like, even now, this is still fun when you get to the second intermission where it's the circles of uh I don't even know how to describe them, but like the donuts of the
Oh yeah, yeah.
like, and you basically do this thing where you stay in the melee range of the boss and you're just kind of dancing in a circle around him. Like that's cool. I like that a lot. That's fun to execute on. But other than that, yeah, this is like a boss where like I still don't even feel like I really get it sometimes because you just don't need to.
hmm
It's just yeah, it's pretty disappointing. Maybe if we
Yeah,
had killed it
the
before the nerf, I'd be saying something differently, but they nerfed it very quickly. So
I also think with this boss is interesting that they share a health pool, but only one of them gets a damage amp during certain parts of this boss.
mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, for better or worse, I think it's perfectly fine, but it is something that's just interesting because you have classes that are going to multi dot the whole time, and like let's say 10 to 15% of the fight, they're just getting double damage on one mob, so they're like they're like 1.5x damage or something like
Yeah,
that at that point.
eating good.
So yeah. And then Queen's a pretty heavy step up, and I think a ultimate boss should be. I mean, um, the last raid that we had, Fyrak was, in my opinion, significantly easier than Tindril. Uh, and so I think that it's good to be back on this path of having a harder end boss than the penultimate boss.
Interesting. I'm trying to think if I agree with that or not. Um, I guess I would see them as comparable. I'm trying to remember how long it took us to kill each of them. I know we struggled on Tindril the first week of progress on him. Um,
hmm
and part of that for me was I was playing a healer then, and getting like the cadence of when you need big healing for that fight was a little weird. And Resto Druid was really, really bad at it. Um, I don't know. I felt like Fyrak is harder, but
I just feel like Tindril had way more, at least in heroic. Maybe you're right. I think Farak might be harder.
yeah, no,
I just feel like so many people got stonewalled on Mythic Tindril.
oh no, yeah, no, on Mythic, that's a whole different ball game for sure.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we don't have to talk about the raid anymore. Again, I already tricked you once in
Fucking
talking about every
tricked me.
boss.
It's an hour into the podcast. How did you do this to me?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I wanted to talk about Mythic Plus a lot more than we're going to get to, but here we are. To segue into Mythic Plus. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you've already seen the thumbnail, but the difficulty curve for Mythic Plus is just absolutely colossally fucked right now. Yeah.
Here's my overall review of Mythic Plus in season 1 of The War Within. Uh-oh.
Okay, to talk about this a little bit more, if you're listening, you're not going to see the thumbnail, but essentially you have like a pretty steady progression from 2s to 6s, and then you get to a 7, and there's a little bump up, and then you have the same steady progression that you had from 2 to 6, from 7 till 9. um and then when you get to 9 and go to 10, there's a larger step up. And then again, 10 and 11, you have about the same, kind of increase in progression that you had before. And then 12s come, and it is just like a fucking train comes and hits your group and just completely fucking obliterates you. Like, to say it is a, minor step up from an 11 is a colossal understatement. Like, it's to the point where we had somebody on our our podcast last week left a comment and said that pugs are just dead after 11s. And I think that's completely true. I haven't done a 12, but watching people do them, the amount of damage required and the amount of damage taken is just so ungodly higher than an 11.
Yeah. So there's the problem Mythic Plus is having right now is that there are sweeping changes to the systems, and each one of them have a new thing, and these new things are interacting in a way that's creating kind of a perfect storm of issues for most people that play this game. So I will agree with you. The Zaloteth Guile FX at a 12 is ridiculous, and basically makes it so you jump from instead of jumping from an 11 to a 12, you're roughly jumping from like an 11 to a 14. Maybe
Mhm.
more than that. I haven't done the math, but essentially that. I want to remind people also that all the testing on keys that was done during beta the entire time was done with the level 12 affix not working properly. It was correctly increasing the health of the mobs by 20%, but was not increasing their damage by 20%. And they figured it out one day and they just threw it back in and were like, we'll look at it and see. And what is essentially happening in 12s, we talked about this before, but like in 12s and beyond, your tanks are just being fucking destroyed. Like, just the white hits from the mobs on 12s are doing so much damage that your tanks are just getting demolished. Why are we seeing primarily prot warriors at 12s and above? It's because they're the absolute best tank at handling just normal white hits from mobs, and that's completely necessary in these dungeons. It's wild how much this stuff hurts. Now, I will say that problem doesn't matter for 99% of the people that interact with this system. The actual problem we're having is that everyone else is bumping up against this system in different ways, and every change that they've made is creating huge problems, and as you said, like bottlenecks and issues. And the I struggle whether I think these things in isolation are problems with the system, but the overall effect that they're having is a whole lot of people are very, very, very mad at Mythic Plus right now, and are either abandoning the system or just incredibly pissed off about the system. We talked about how successful the launch of this expansion was. We talk about how much everyone was loving it. They're loving the dungeons. They're loving the story. The raid is fun. The aesthetic, the feel of it is Warcraft. And now we got this big fucking huge problem above everything, which is that Mythic Plus is far and away the worst segment of the game right now for a lot of people. And that is a huge problem, and they need to address it
So,
immediately.
do you think this is the worst iteration of Mythic Plus that we have really experienced?
See, this is where I struggle. I think the answer to that question is yes. And I judge that just but going off of the conversations that I've seen and the things that people are saying and that kind of thing. I struggle with it personally for me because is it harder for me this season than it has been since I came back to this game? Yes, 100%. Is it harder to get to the top crests this season than it ever has before since the crest system was introduced? Yes, 100%. Do I think, from my perspective, that is a problem? I don't know. Do I think it's okay that it's difficult to get myth track gear? Probably. But I also acknowledge that I am not the majority of people interacting with this system. And so I'm going to answer yes to your question, but like with that caveat that like there are many parts of this thing that I would label as problems, but I personally think are fine, I guess is what I would say.
So I think one discussion that we need to have, and you started on it, but we have top end players, and a lot of people in the Mythic Plus community making videos and comments and posts about how Mythic Plus is just like fundamentally broken and we need to take a look at it and yada yada yada. And then they suggest like fixes that are going to help with things like this. But then they don't think about how that's going to impact people doing sixes. And then you get like, let's make this suggestion of like mobs just do like 20% less damage. Okay, well now the people doing sixes are essentially running twos, and like, is that gonna be fun? I mean, no. Like,
The funniest thing this weekend was Quasi, who is a player I very much respect and watched all his tank guides, really, really interested in what he has to say about just about everything, released this video this weekend that was like, Mythic Plus is fundamentally broken or something like that. Some very well done clickbait headline. So of course I immediately clicked on it. And he starts immediately talking about how the transition from 11 to 12s is too hard. And I'm like, dude, the majority of the people complaining about the system don't give a shit about that. You will not fix Mythic Plus by removing or toning down Xalatath's Guile. Is that a problem? Yes, absolutely. That is a problem. Is that the primary problem that the majority of people are complaining about right now? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The thing that people are complaining about right now is they want gilded crests, and it's really hard to get gilded crests. That's what they're complaining about. That there is an expectation for acquisition of loot that the game has established itself, and suddenly it's hard to do that, and people aren't happy.
Yeah, the other thing that I want to talk about is on the topic of gilded crests. Like, I think you and I have already talked about this, and I think you touched on it already. But are we fine with nines being where you get gilded crests? Also, keep in mind, right? Like, gilded crests are only going to be used to upgrade, what is it, the last 2 slots of hero track gear and then all of myth. So, like, you have to be doing either mythic raid or you have to be doing 10 pluses for your vault to even get myth gear, which is going to use these gilded crests. So, like, is this as big of a problem as people are making it? I guess is the question that I have for you.
So the exception to what you just said is crafted gear. And that is I think where the problem lies, and that is where people are mostly frustrated because people are sitting on these sparks, they have these sparks, and they want to make the big awesome weapon with their sparks. But it not only is it more difficult to get gilded crests, but also the amount of gilded crests you need have been greatly increased. So it's basically an entire week's worth of gilded crests to get one weapon at not basically, literally it's an entire week's worth of gilded crests to get that crafted item at max. I struggle. You can hear the struggle in my voice here because I struggle with this a lot. Part of the way I feel about this is kind of about how I approach this game. So in my mind, in a Mythic Plus season, there are 2 different phases to me. There is the gearing up phase, and then there is the push phase. And I am not really concerned about like how high I can push until I know that first phase is done. So in my mind, I want the gearing up phase to kind of go as quickly as humanly possible. I want to be
Mhm.
geared up fast, and I want that gearing up process to not be. I'm not saying I want it to be like free and easy, but like I don't want it to be like super, super, super challenging. I just want to gear up, and then we can start about really pushing me against the really challenging stuff. Um, and what this has done has essentially broken that, in that the gearing up phase is definitely harder for the average player. Well, okay, no, I'm going to take that back, because delves have made gearing up to 619 way easier. Like that is, I think, the fundamental break that we're having here is the game has made it very, very easy and quick via the delve system to get heroic track gear, or at least to get champion track gear that can be upgraded to 619. It's made that very, very simple, and then you hit a wall, right? And I think a lot of people are going to be just hard stuck at the 619 wall. And do I think that's a good thing? I don't know. I don't know. Like, I think it's okay for there to be certain things that you just can't get because you're not good enough at the game. But also, I think people should also be able to, like, the game throws you like a bone of craft, like you get one crafted item you can get every 2 weeks, and being able to like get a super version of something every 2 weeks for the average player feels pretty damn good. So I think, man, I'm so torn on this. I don't know. What do you think?
Uh, so personally, I don't view it as a big of a problem. Again, this doesn't really impact me that much, so I have a very jaded view on this. Um, but yeah, I think you nailed it when you said that if you aren't doing the highest level of content, you shouldn't be getting the highest level of gear, right? Like there should always be some incentive, some reward for you to do something. At some point that's going to go away, and I think that this might just be their way of kind of like prolonging that for the people who are doing the higher content, because
Hmm.
if you were a high key pusher in previous seasons, week 3 you're like capped on item level.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a good thing. Like it's prolonging that time period for the people who want to kind of see incremental increases in both skill and gear.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll say is, I mean, I am essentially just doing nines and tens now. Like that's where I am at. We've timed our first tens last week, and I'm sure we'll continue to do that this week. And so quickly we're gonna gear out of this being a problem. I will say, with my very limited playtime I've had over the last few weeks, because I've just been insanely busy, it feels super bad to fail a nine,
Yeah.
and the penalty of less crests feels awful to get to the end of a 30-minute dungeon when I really only have time to play one or two dungeons a day, and do a nine, and specifically do a nine because you're like, oh, this will be easier, we'll probably be okay with this, and then the 7 affix comes in, one fuck up, one mistake, the group wipes, and you're like, oh, we're gonna be really close to, should we just stop now? Oh, but it's a 9. If we stop now, then it's down to an 8, and 8 is a dead key. It's a use, like, fuck eights. I hate them. So I don't know. I don't know if the fix is like what we talked about before, which is just that the key should just drop crests regardless of whether you time it or not. If you finish, it should drop I don't know. It feels really bad. It feels really bad to get 5 instead of 12. Knowing that there's 12, it feels really bad. So I'm just so, again, I think this is this confluence of the +7 FX is really punishing. It is really punishing. And the keys are more challenging. And as you said, the jump from 9 to 10, and the change to how gilded crests work. All these things have come together, and the end result is, regardless of how you and I feel about them ultimately, the people the people are mad. And sometimes it doesn't matter whether the people are right or wrong in their anger. The point is, when you look at the stats, people are not engaging in the system in the numbers they have in the past. And Blizzard
Mhm.
is absolutely looking at that. And I suspect that regardless of what you and I or any high level key pusher thinks about this, they're going to make some pretty big changes. Now, are they going to completely rehaul the system mid-season? No, absolutely not. So the big changes to this we're probably not going to see until season 2. What I would expect is they're going to go back on some of the tank nerfs they did before the expansion, which, by the way, I think we can just unequivocally say was a complete failure. if you read,
Bad idea.
if you
Bad
read,
idea.
if you read their like goals, if you read that post where they first announced this and you read what they were trying to do, and you look at what's happening right now, did not work. Fail. So I think they probably buff tank survivability and self-sustain a little bit, and then I think they massively drop some of the dungeon whether that's like an adjustment to scaling or just targeted drops in damage to certain mobs or what have you. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I would guess I don't think they would do anything as crazy as like announcing today like gilded crests now drop from 7s or something like that, or the time affix now is only 10 seconds instead of 15 seconds. I don't think mid-season they're going to do something as fundamental as that, but I do think we're going to see pretty big nerfs across the board. And if they want to save the system for the majority of players, I think they kind of have to do that because, yeah, I know it's apples and oranges, but I was looking at that chart of participation in Mythic Plus, number of keys run week to week as compared to previous expansions. And week 2 of The War Within was equivalent to week 2 of season 2 of Dragonflight, the lowest attended and least liked season of the expansion. And that's not 1-to-1 because there were more key levels in Dragonflight, right? So you had an additional 10 levels that people were engaging with. Also, delves didn't exist, so like Mythic Plus was really the only way of gearing. So it was forcing more people into that system that don't have to participate now. So it doesn't line up exactly the way you want it to. But it's the first season of a new expansion. It should be far and above, like higher than anything else, and that's not what it's at. So yeah, they'll be changing stuff. I'm convinced of it.
I completely agree with you. And like you said, the players are going to speak, and if they aren't interacting with content, surely things will be looked into. So completely agree with everything that you just said, and I can only hope that the changes that they do are decent and thought through. I don't like when we just like read a post about a change and it's like, why? Why did we do this? This doesn't solve anything. This is stupid. The other thing that I do want to say is if they are going to nerf the like time off of deaths or something like that, at least they have the wherewithal to do it right now. I mean, you could always nerf that in the middle of a season, but you can't really add time to a death.
Yeah.
So I guess there is a chance. I, like you said, don't think that that's reasonable. I don't think that's going to happen.
So
yeah.
I heard this on other podcasts, and I'm curious what you think about it. So you know how delves have like lives in them,
Yeah.
and then after you use those lives, you get like, I think you don't get the bountiful chest or whatever. I was thinking of what if like Mythic Plus, sorry, this I wasn't thinking. This person was thinking, what if Mythic Plus had like a cache of like oopsie deaths where like you start the dungeon with like 5 buffer deaths, and maybe that amount of buffer deaths goes down as you go up key level, just like the amount of extra delves death you get go down as you have upper key level. And like these are deaths that do not count against the timer when you die. So like just like this idea of the system has a built-in fuck up thing for you where you get a few deaths here and there, or maybe even at lower key levels you get like 1 free wipe where it doesn't count for against you for time. But I mean there's still the penalty of like just dying slows down your DPS, slows down, you're gonna have to run back, all these things happen, but like from a specific time perspective they build in a little buffer there. What do you think about that?
I think it's interesting. Ultimately, I feel like this isn't something that needs to be overcomplicated. And at this point, why don't we just increase the timer
Yeah,
by
I mean, that's fair.
whatever that amount is?
That's fair.
Um, that would just be my solution to this. I feel like adding in another thing that's just going to confuse people who start playing the system is not necessarily the right way to solve it.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's a cool idea. I think that would be definitely a band-aid solution for the problem that we've caused
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
But like I said, just add 2 minutes to the timer. Like,
So yeah, I mean, and this is a question I've asked before. I want to ask you it again here now that we've kind of seen things in action. What is the appropriate level for when a wipe should end the key? Like,
at this point, I think the game has stated a 12.
I mean, I think arguably a 10. Like
Even or
I'm
7. Shit. I mean,
a
if you're
lot for a lot
barely
of
timing
players.
good.
For a lot of players, that new affix comes in, and if you wipe, that's a minute and a half off your timer, and you're probably not going to time it. And so the
Yeah.
question is that an appropriate? It's a 7, which doesn't even drop the best crests. You can't get the best gear with it. Is that an appropriate place for the punishment for fucking up being you're done? And I don't think so. I don't think it is. And so yeah, I mean, I ultimately that to me says this affix needs to be looked at, or timers need to be adjusted or something. I agree with you. The deaths mechanic is like introducing complexity into system that could just be fixed the most simplest way possible, which is just give more time. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like that's a fair trade-off at like a 7 or an 8 or a 9, that you don't get one wipe. I do think, like, if you look back to season 3 of Dragonflight, the amount of wipes you could do and still time a key at higher levels was way too lenient, right? It was like way too much.
Mhm.
Like, you could wipe 2-3 times in a 20 and still time that key. That's way too much. But I think we've swung too far the other way, and so that needs to be figured out. Also, can we just, for once and for all, have graveyards that update in these dungeons? Like Stone Vault. What the fuck? What, like, if you wipe on a boss in Stone Vault, the key is dead. If you're on a 7 or higher and you wipe on the boss in Stone Vault, the key is dead. Because not only do you lose 90 seconds, but you have to run all the way back to the boss, which takes at least another minute, probably more. It's just dead. It's just immediately dead. Why? You put the little train tracks in there. Just let them go the other way too. Or
Mhm.
just spawn you in front of the room. What? Why? Why?
The interesting thing that I think about this too is we have dungeons that will update as well, and then we have mists, which, like, you have to click something to make the graveyard update. Which, like, if you played Shadowlands, it's just kind of ingrained in you to go click the thing and then keep moving on. But if you didn't play Shadowlands, and your whole group didn't play Shadowlands, you have no idea you need to do that.
Yeah.
You might not even know that that's a thing that you can do.
Yeah.
And so
Especially
now you're wiping on Tredova and you're running from the fucking start of the instance all the way to the final boss. And it's like, what in the actual hell is going on?
especially since the other Shadowlands dungeon that comes from the same expansion randomly just says, "Okay, you killed this boss. You can spawn here now." Cool. Thanks. Why 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 don't you do that everywhere?
I do like, I will say, I like that they added the chat message that says your graveyard is updated.
Uh-huh.
I think that should be like a notification, though, that pops up,
Yeah.
not just a chat message. So,
I think they
and
should.
also make the damn nuts in Miss just happen. Like, you
Yeah.
kill the first boss, the first nut activates.
Yeah.
Like,
There,
please.
there's no reason not to. There's no reason not to. Like, these are just the no-brainer shit that is just like, why do we insist upon doing this? Like, I just don't understand. And it's not even consistent dungeon to dungeon. Yeah, it's some dungeons they're like completely fine. Oh yeah, just update, here you go, every new boss you kill you get to spawn there, it's fine. And then some dungeons they're like, absolutely not, you will run back from the very beginning and you will like it. And it doesn't make any sense to me. It just doesn't.
So I do kind of want to talk about a dungeon specifically while we have some time.
Okay.
So I don't want to cut this whole graveyard discussion short because I know you're very passionate about it. But I do. I need to talk to you about Necrotic Wake. I need to talk to you about what a fucking travesty this dungeon has become. And I have a very legitimate question for you. So, not to out you or throw anybody under the bus, but last night I was watching you guys do a 10, which was just like a no lever 10, doing it with people who don't necessarily do 10s that often or on characters that they don't necessarily do 10s on.
Hmm.
And it wasn't going the greatest. But you got to the third boss, and like the mentality of this boss has always been use all the spears on it, one phase it, kill it, be done. I'm really starting to think that this boss needs to be thought at in a significantly different way, and that it is no longer a one phase boss that you need to push or else, but you need to actually engage with the other constructs that this boss spawns. And that just needs to be on every key level at all times, always. And is just going to be a boss that takes longer than you were initially thinking. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that this boss is not only fundamentally broken, but I think that as a community, we've been trained to think of it one way, and it might just be something we need a mental check on.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like the three spear lust, yada yada yada, works the best on it still. But it does like completely fuck you over for other things because like you really kind of want lust on the second boss because the second boss kind of sucks too. I mean, not in the same way that Stitch Flesh sucks, but the second boss is a pain in the fucking ass, and like the casts from that boss hurt so much, but you can't kick those casts because you have to save your kicks for the two mages that are going to spawn. So like maybe you can get a kick every once in a while, but like that's a boss you would really like to have lust on, but you can't. You can't because you need it for the third boss. So I'm kind of with you on this. Like you have three spears. Maybe the play is actually to rip one spear on Stitch Flesh. So when the first abomination comes out, pulls him down, you rip a spear on him, do your cleave thing, and then as soon as he jumps back up, you switch modes in the fight, and it just becomes about getting the ads down and cleaving onto the boss and extending the fight that way. Then also you have another spear for the third boss or the last boss, which sucks. So I hate that boss so much. The fourth boss I hate so much. It takes 45 minutes to kill that boss. It's so long. The idea of losing a DPS is so annoying, especially when you combine that with the shield the boss gets. So half the time you're not even damaging the health, you're damaging the shield. And they took away the hammers that would let you break the shield. They said, no, you can't have those hammers anymore. Fuck you. Um, yeah, I hate this dungeon so much. And I agree with you though. If they're not going to nerf it, which they should, we need to think about this stuff differently.
I the problem that I have, and the reason I brought this up after watching you guys, is you did the lust triple spear, and ultimately you ended up wiping still.
Yeah,
But then, in my opinion, at that point, the key is just over.
it's
Like
dead.
you
Yeah.
will not kill the boss. But you guys ended up pulling through and killing it. But you again, you had to have this completely different mentality of like, okay, every time the boss gets pulled down, we get like 5 seconds of DPS on him, and then everything has to go back into the construct, and we're just going to spend 5 minutes on this boss to
Hmm.
kill it. It worked, so that's why I'm wondering, like, is that just what we need to be doing as a community on this boss?
It might be. I mean, the other problem is that the hook yank mechanic is so janky and will hit so many things instead of the boss that like when you throw all your eggs into the lust and spear basket, like what happened to us on that pull was the hook didn't hook the boss for some reason.
Hmm.
Like it it just it just didn't. Like I don't know if it hit a totem. Like I know it hits totems. I know it can hit pets. I know something like it's so weird. It's not a guaranteed mechanic. And when you're putting all your eggs in this basket and you have a mechanic that can sometimes just go awry, Um, yeah, that's bad. So I think they're not going to fix that mechanic because those same problems have been in existence in Shadowlands. It just wasn't as big of a deal back then because the abominations just didn't hurt as much as they do now. So even if you fuck up a grab, like I remember the tanks holding like 3 abominations and the boss at the same time, and it was a lot of damage. They were having to cycle cooldowns, but like they were able to do it, and you just can't do that anymore. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you here. That being said, they gotta nerf this fucking boss. Like they have to. Like I think a fundamental like redesign could maybe in order to the effect of like maybe he just only jumps back up at certain intervals and not time based. Like maybe it's just like instead of after a certain amount of time, it's at 75%, he's going to jump back up at 50%, something like that. Because like it's awful. It's really awful.
Mhm. The other part about this dungeon is you kind of touched on it. Last boss sucks. Second boss sucks. Third boss sucks. Honestly, the first boss fucking sucks.
Yeah.
There is not a cool boss in this dungeon at all at this point. Where
The
I think,
trash sucks. The trash
yeah,
sucks.
the necromancers, the necromancer pack that has the 2 mages at the very beginning, right when you get across the bridge and you go to the right, that pack is like potentially, I think, the most deadly pack in the entire dungeon. And that is wild because if you teach somebody how to do this dungeon, you tell them to single target down the necromancer, ignore the other things, but you have to be getting kicks on these 2 ads. The funniest part about that is the necromancer can spawn more skeletons. They can spawn a third fucking mage into this pack, which you need to kick the necromancer, and now you need to kick 3 volleys. So die?
Yeah. All the trash in this place is stupid, man. Like this is like I'll do like a 10 Grim Batol, which is not and it's not an easy key. Does not have easy trash, and like I'll feel like I'm getting my shit kicked in, but like in a way where I'm like, okay, you know, I can play around this, right? You need to closely manage your cooldowns. You need to be aware, like you just need skill expression, and like that feels fair, and I can tell when I fucked up and why I'm taking increased damage, and I can recover from like all the fun stuff that makes tanking fun. And then I'll walk in a Necrotic Wake and I will just die. Like I pulled a pack. I was in Incarn. I had Barkskin up and I just died. And it's just like what like part of it's that it was a lot of magic damage and I'm a bear tank, so I'm just fucking terrible at magic damage, but it just doesn't feel good. It just doesn't feel
Mhm.
good. And
Yeah.
uh, I know they took a pretty hard stance on Grim Batol last week where they nerfed quite a bit, and I just think they need to make a pass of this dungeon immediately.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is interesting in this place is watching high level keyers do this. They pull like 2 of the gatekeepers right at the start of the dungeon, which to me is like, okay, we're just dead. But they managed to get through it. Um, and I think for the majority of casual players, you're pulling the Narzuda pack, the pack right before you go across the bridge. And if you want to pull that pack and you have any physical damage dealers in your party, you need a purge.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're requiring purge on this pack. Shamans aren't being like, it's not in the Wowhead build for the default shaman build for this. Okay, hunters. Well, hunters aren't necessarily in the greatest spot right now. Priests, like, it's just there's a lot of things that go into this where it's like we we cranked up the difficulty in this dungeon because we fundamentally reworked how the weapons work. We got rid of the extra bonus stuff that we get from the anima goblins or golems. Jeez, uh, we changed. So got rid of that. Changed how spears work. Got rid of hammers. Like all of the things that made this dungeon easy in the past have been either removed or changed. And I think that that is ultimately why this dungeon is so much worse. It isn't necessarily that they did anything fundamentally wrong, barring the fact that you have to pull the entire fucking dungeon. That they did wrong. They shouldn't have changed that.
They have no. They just broke this dungeon. Like I just like from every single angle I can look at, they broke this dungeon. I wasn't in love with this dungeon in Shadowlands. Like I didn't think that this is Necrotic Wake. This is my favorite key. I'm so glad I got this key. But I didn't hate it either. And
Mhm.
I hate it now. I hate it. I do like, and for some reason, this is the fucking key I get over and over and over again, and I just like I haven't seen a Dawnbreaker in 2 weeks. I need a Dawnbreaker so bad, and I just no one has had one ever, but we have 12 Necrotic Wakes in the guild right now.
So I do have one other thing that I want to touch on for Mythic Plus, and then I'll probably cut us a little short because obviously we went long on raid. My fault. Sorry. Uh,
How dare you?
we have a bit of a meta coming out for Mythic Plus, and unfortunately for that, AUG is once again in the meta.
It has
The
to be.
hopes and dreams of AUG not being in the meta have died with just the sheer amount of damage you are taking in these keys.
Yeah.
That's sad.
Don't worry, because they nerfed Blistering Scales by 10%, and they nerfed Earth Shield by 10%. Or not by 10%. They nerfed Earth Shield by like 2%. Whatever. Good. Thank God. This is what we needed. We needed the tanks were beat too tanky in high keys. That was the problem. We fixed it now.
So the other part of this that I think is interesting to think about, and I think that a lot of people don't talk about, maybe Tettles is like one of the only people I've seen talk about this. We have overperformers in Mythic Plus, like significant overperformers. Frost Death Knight is like clear and above, far and away the best example of this. But Frost Death Knight's not really performing that well in the raid. It's middle of the pack, maybe upper middle of the pack. It's not going to get nerfed. They can't nerf it. If they nerf it, then it's going to make it worse in raid, and Blizzard really only balances around raid. So we're probably just going to see Frost Death Knight and AUG Evoker in every single key. And if you look at the top keys, you're seeing them in every single key. Another one is Mage. Mage is obviously the flex spot currently, which is the weirdest thing to me. Like you can bring like a shaman or something over a mage, but like another one is Resto Shaman. And I think Resto Shaman has the potential to get hit because they are performing well in raid. But Warrior? Prot Warrior is not going to get hit. But if they nerfed Prot Warrior, it would just fundamentally not work as a class. Like its whole thing is shield block and
Yep.
ignore pain. And if they nerf that, then they don't have damage. So they can't really do much.
No, this is the problem they always get themselves into, and I agree. The raid tuning versus Mythic Plus tuning thing has just been a problem in this game since those two systems existed side by side. Something needs adjusting in one, but can't be adjusted because the other, and yeah, like this happens over and over and over again. And what you hope, I guess, is that none of these things affect your average player's ability to engage in the systems to the level they want to. Like at the bleeding edge, you stop caring, right? Like, don't care that a world first guild had to bring 5 Death Knights to kill something. I don't care about that because that's never going to affect the average player playing the game. And it's the same. It's the same with to a certain extent. I don't care that if 14 requires an AUG and a warrior and a shaman because most people aren't going to do a 14. But the problem is when these things start bleeding into the levels that which people are engaging. And I think that is what's happening right now. I think these keys are so challenging and you're getting people that want to get 10s and 9s. And my God, let me tell you, as a tank, having an augmentation evoker in your group makes the world of difference. Do I need it to do a 9 or 10? No. Does it cover my ass if I am late on a global or make a mistake or something like that? Absolutely. And why would I not want that? Why would I not want that? That is the problem, that these things have started to bleed into the level at which the majority of people engage with these systems. And that sucks. What you get is people and pugs sitting and looking for group for hours because they're not playing those classes. Because what happens, like, this is what happens with difficulty, right? Like, this is what people do. If something's hard, people don't want to take chances. They don't want to take risks. They want the easiest possible path to guarantee, or as close to as possible guarantee, completion. So they will do what they need to do to make that possible. And if that means taking a meta that you don't need in a 9 or 10, but will make a 9 or 10 easier, it's what you're going to do every time. And that's where we're at.
Mhm. Well, for what it's worth, I'm gearing an Augavoker, so just so you know.
Yes. Thank you. I need it.
But anyways, Scott, like I said, I might have kept us a little too long on raid, so we might need to wrap this one up a little bit.
Sure.
I will say in the coming weeks, be on the lookout for MDI discussions, because without Echo being in the MDI, I think we might have a lot to talk about. I don't know. We might not have a lot to talk about. It might just be mandatory. So
Dorky has said he's not playing, so I don't know what the rest of that team is doing, but he's not doing MDI.
Well, that's a bit saddening, because I really well, maybe we'll only have mandatory to talk about at this point. So but yeah, I mean, anything else that comes up, we're gonna start working on alts soon, so maybe we'll have some alt discussions. There's some weird gearing stuff. If you haven't checked that out, look up Tettles on YouTube. He's got a video about it. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this week's podcast, though. So if you guys have started to do 10s and everything, I asked this last week, but let us know how everything's feeling. Honestly, if you started doing 12s, let us know how everything's feeling. Last week we were told that keys pretty much died at 12.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to get a general feeling on if that's continuing. Like, are pug keys essentially still dying at 12s? Maybe I'll ask it next week and see, iteratively how things are getting along with people getting.
Yeah. I'm sure we got some listeners out there that are hard stuck at 11. Sure, we got some listeners out there that are hard stuck at 9. Sure, we got some listeners out there that are hard stuck at 6. I'm sure those exist, and I'm sure y'all are out there, and I know it's frustrating. I get it. It's tough. It's tough out there.
I would say keep your head up. Changes are likely coming. Don't beat yourself up too much. I fell into this trap season 1 of Dragonflight, so don't fall into it yourself.
Yep.
But yeah, contact us over at yellingintothevoidwow@gmail.com. YouTube is at yellingintothevoidwow, and Twitter is at intothevoidwow.
And please subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. If you listen via the old feed, the podcast feed, please subscribe to it. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, that YouTube that Tevin just linked, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts are available to listen to.
And last but not least, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting on the YouTube videos. Also liking, subscribing anywhere else that you can. Like, for example, over on Spotify, a 5-star rating on Spotify would be amazing. Thank you, everybody. But all of these help us get more exposure, get introduced to a lot of new people, and if you enjoy what we make here, it'll help us keep making new content for you guys. But until next week, we will have our fingers crossed for Mythic Plus changes, and we'll just be over here yelling into the void.